through Indonesia and back to Freo. At the end, when we came round North Mole, or South Mole, sorry, which is this particular photo here, we had 16,000 miles on the log, so that's what we'd clocked from Lorient. And the original idea was that I'd sort of get the boat and then everybody could come out and join, and we could, different family, friends, and do a bit of a cruise back. But of course COVID put paid to that, so for nearly all of this distance there was either 2 people or 3 people on board, so it ended up as a bit of a short-handed sail. The good news was, look, amazingly, almost nothing went wrong with the boat. I think the masthead light stopped working and got replaced. We had a bit of a problem with the roller furler, the furling system, and that was fixed. But apart from that, no difficulties. And I'm sorry, I can't provide any stories about being attacked by terrorists or sea monsters, or, to be perfectly honest, actually really hitting any very bad weather. So it was, I'm sorry if it's a bit of an anticlimax. So.
What about the siren?
Sorry?
What about the siren?
No, we sailed, we didn't quite go past where the sirens live, but and of course I discovered after naming the boat that in France it's not sirene, it's sirène, and sirène for the French is more of a mermaid rather than a tempter of men. But I thought I'd start off with trying to answer some of the bigger questions. So, look, I'm in my 60s, you know, perhaps I should be putting a deposit down on an apartment in a retirement village. So what the hell am I doing buying a brand new boat and getting it customised as well? And this actually goes back to the Bali race of 2017. So we did the race up to Bali, went cruising afterwards on a little island in the Java Sea, and I was awake early and up in the cockpit and listening to the call to prayer and the chickens and all the noise off the shore, and the satellite phone pinged, and that was my brother to tell me my father had just died, but he was 93. And he'd been actively sailing until he was 85. And as I sort of absorbed that news and made plans to fly back to the funeral and thought about it, I thought, bloody hell, I'm just over 60. You know, if I can get 25 years out of a boat, I've done well. What the hell, I'll buy a new boat. So when I came back, I had a chat with Alex and said, look, you know, you might have thought you're going to inherit some money. I said, I've actually decided to blow it on the new boat. So what do you think of that? He said, go for it, Dad. Yeah. So, look, do you have to be crazy to do this? No, but being crazy certainly helps, that's for sure. So, next question then, why a JPK 45? I guess I'm interested in racing. I love cruising. I can't afford 2 boats, so I've got to try and find a boat that sort of does both. And searching around, the JPK is probably the closest thing. It probably is the lightest of the full cruising boats without going to the pogo type boats. It's got the twin rudders that I wanted, yeah, so it's a dual purpose boat. Next decision, sailing the boat back rather than shipping it. Well, that was a bit of a no-brainer, really. I love sailing, and I wanted to sail in the Mediterranean, so that was a simple decision to sail a boat back. And then, of course, the next decision is, well, which way do you go? And I did try to put a little bit of thought into this one. Sorry, let me just talk a little bit about the boat, if you don't mind. This is going to be my last attempt to convince this audience. This is actually a cruising boat. It's not a race boat. So it is set up for long distance cruising. So we've got 800 litres of water capacity. We've got 400 litres of diesel, all in tanks under the floor in the main part of the cabin to keep the water in the centre of the boat. The boat's set up with a staysail and a couple of check stays to control the mast bend. twin rudders, which have proven to be a huge advantage, and the basic dimensions are there. But of course, because I do like doing a bit of racing, I had to tweak the boat a bit, and JPK being a small builder, they're happy to accommodate those changes. So standard boat comes with a hard dodger, so it means you can't see forward. Very difficult to communicate with the foredeck, so we got rid of that and put a canvas one on instead. We were short of winches. Standard boat only came with 4 winches, so we certainly needed a couple of winches on the cabin top and led a lot of halyards back to that. An interesting change was the boat, as designed, was only a 2.2 metre draft, and I thought that was a bit light for a 45-foot boat, so they made a custom keel. So we pushed the draft up from 2.2 to 2.6, but to keep the righting moment of the boat the same, or the keel the same, we could take 400 kilos off the weight of the keel. So in terms of weight savings around the boat, this one change sort of blew everything else out of the water to keep the boat weight down. Carbon mast, got an interesting furling system, so it's a rod forestay which actually rotates, and so it has no foil on it, so the rod forestay rotates, the jibs are hanked on to the forestay, and they will roll up around the forestay. So again, you wouldn't do it for cruising only, but for cruising and racing it gives you that flexibility. And look, the boat loves a wave, loves a best speed so far. We've got 23.1 knots. Unfortunately, Jeff Bishop was on the helm, but there's plenty more in the tank there yet. I reckon we'll crack 25 one of these days. So. So the big decision is which way to go. So there's basically, as I saw it, 3 options. You can either go west, to go across the Atlantic, through the Panama Canal, all the way across the Pacific Ocean and come around the top of Australia. It's got the advantage it's downwind, of course, so it sort of meets one of the criteria of cruising, I suppose, but it's a bloody long way, particularly coming here to the west coast. So the next option is sort of go south, the old Clipper route, and so basically go south towards South America, pick up the westerlies, take a stop at Cape Town, straight from Cape Town to Freo. In some ways this sort of quite appealed to me, because I've never sailed in the Southern Ocean, and the idea of blasting down some big swells in the Southern Ocean, that had some appeal. But obviously this route is very long legs, not a lot of cruising opportunities apart from a few particular places. And the third option then was to go east, which is to go down through the Mediterranean. It's shorter, saves a lot of miles, but of course the next question is, what about the Red Sea? So this is just a map of the risk ratings of the various countries. And you know, my first observation was there's not a lot of green on this chart. So this isn't a DFAT one, but the DFAT one is very similar. So basically, yellow sort of, you know, it's sort of travel, but take precautions. The different shades of red are somewhere between no and hell no as places to go to. So you can see the problem with the Red Sea, and particularly down the bottom end of the Red Sea, where you've sailed between Somalia on one side and Yemen on the other side. You come past Eritrea and a few other, nowadays Sudan in civil war. So it's some fairly unattractive options, and you can see why people use Djibouti as a stopping point, because it is a little oasis of quite moderate risk. But I found this data about pirate attacks. So this is on commercial shipping, it's not on recreational vessels. So this is a global reporting service. And they list there the attacks. And look, I would say basically West Africa has overtaken the Red Sea by a mile in terms of the potential attacks. This year was 22, nothing reported in the Red Sea, and as you can see, a fair bit up in Indonesia and the Philippines, but tend to be at more lower level. So this is not to say there's no risks, there certainly are, and we made a French trimaran in Sri Lanka, which subsequently went too close to Yemen, got chased, got shot at. Luckily, nobody injured. A few holes in the boat, but being a trimaran, they had the speed to get out of harm's way. But having said that, if they'd done their research, they would have known that there'd been a small commercial vessel that had been attacked in almost exactly the same area, and there's been some other incidents. So it's really a question of doing your homework. However, it is, sorry, you probably can't read this, this chart on the right-hand side, but basically there's quite a large area of it is marked as the high-risk zone, and then there's a dotted line which runs down the middle, and that is the recommended transit corridor. So when we came through, this is how the high-risk zone looked. So it went a fair way out into the Indian Ocean. What is recommended to do is to report into, there's a UK maritime tracking service, so you report in now, I think it was once a day. They recommend you keep your AIS on, because that way they can find you very quickly if you've got trouble. There's a recommendation not to travel in convoys, because frankly, one sailing boat isn't going to be able to look after another sailing boat against people armed with machine guns, and you're better off to move more quickly and move independently. But there has been an update, so this high-risk zone, I'm not sure it's been now totally eliminated or it's been greatly reduced, but the maritime surveillance is still ongoing. There's also a Facebook group called the Red Sea Passage Group, and that's a fantastic resource. You have to apply to join. It's not a public group, but there's a huge amount of information. There are boats transiting the Red Sea every week of the year for sure. I think last year there was like about 100 boats have transited the Red Sea, and everybody posts, what they found, the ports they stayed at, where to get food and fuel. It's a really invaluable resource. So I think if you do your research, it's certainly not no risk, but we cruise around Indonesia, I think, without too much of a care. When you looked at the piracy chart, there's actually more attacks in Indonesia than there is in the Red Sea. Just go on to the Suez Canal, I guess. Suez Canal's a breeze. It's a 2-day trip because you can't travel at night, and unless you can maintain a speed of 9 knots, you have to do a stop in the middle. But there's a nice marina there in the middle, and there's actually some lakes, so naturally formed lakes in the centre of the canal. You have to have a pilot on board, and the first pilot we had was excellent. He said, "I'm the pilot, I will steer the boat." And as we left in the dark, I was very happy he was doing that. And he kept us perfectly right at the edge of the shipping channel. And the ships which are going past, they're doing about 8 or 9 knots, so they don't actually overtake very quickly. And we didn't have any problems at all with the wash coming off those ships or getting sucked into those ships. Second pilot was a younger guy. He spent all his time playing with his phone, so it wasn't quite so good. You do have to get an agent, really, to help you through the paperwork, because there's lots of paperwork and there's lots of fees and charges. You don't actually have to enter the country of Egypt. The Suez Canal zone is like excised from the country of Egypt, so you can go through without actually doing your entry. And when we did it, coming north to south, was about $1,200 in terms of agents' fees, charges, pilots, everything. But they keep messing around with it. Sometimes it has been cheaper to go south than north, but I think they've turned that around now at the moment. So, but no, going through the Suez Canal was a very, very cruisy experience. The next one coming down to the bottom, the black line down the centre is the recommended transit passage. But when we were sailing, we basically had a light northeasterly breeze, so we had to beat our way basically 600 miles down the Gulf of Eden. And this is a screenshot, and as you can see, we set up some limits as to how close we would go to the coast. We couldn't see the coast to about 30, 40 miles off the coast. The frustrating thing was, in the afternoon, just like here, you get the sea breeze, and that would start to bend the wind in by the coast. So if you went further inshore, you could get a, we joked about trying to pick up the wind shift off Somalia. But at the end of the day, we didn't do that. We stayed to the channel. We got visited. We had a Japanese plane that would fly over once a day and call us up on VHF. We had a bit of chit-chat with the Iranian Navy, which was interesting because at that stage they were supplying rebels in Yemen, so I'm not sure they were there to help us, but anyway, they were nice on the radio. But yeah, no, that was practically how we came through that section of the trip. Move on to the next sort of big decision. So then you've got to come across the Indian Ocean, and the Indian Ocean has the classic monsoon, and in fact, monsoon is an Arabic word from the Arabic traders who used to trade on that ocean. So basically, you've got a northeast monsoon during the northern hemisphere winter time, and the southwest during the summertime, and now, naturally, you would think, well, you'd go in the southwest monsoon because you'd be going downwind, so that would be the natural thing to do. But when you start reading a bit more and you discover what the conditions are actually like in the southwesterly monsoon, of course, that's the wet season. So that means not just obviously rain, but thunderstorms, squalls, shifting wind speed, shifting wind direction. It does also get bloody windy, so there's an island, Socotra, which is just off the Somali coast, and it's got winds over 35 knots for 40% of the time in the peak of that period, so it is really blowing. As I said, you're sailing downwind in a shifting wind, so it's going to be sail in, sail out, a lot of work for the crew, a lot of work for the autopilot. So, and it also, but if you look at the northeast trade, it's almost the exact opposite. It's a very stable airstream, so the wind speed would probably, we would see probably an average of 15 with a high of 18 and a low of 14, hardly any variation in wind speed. Blue sky, pretty flat seas, and a very steady wind direction, and obviously that's what we decided to sail in, and basically the autopilot could handle all of the conditions. So, and as you come across the Indian Ocean, that northeasterly tends round to the north, and as a consequence, as you get out of the Gulf of Eden, that channel I showed, you can duck south, and so we ended up close reaching, probably in 12 knots of breeze with sort of 6 or 7 knots of boat speed, and flat seas, just magic conditions, just day after day. And so we did the trip all the way from Djibouti to the Maldives in, I think it was about 10 days, really very fast trip. Anyway, if I can move on to another highlight. As we were coming through the Mediterranean, I've always had the Middle Sea race on my list, and it's not run until October, so the timing worked perfectly for us. So we signed up for the Middle Sea race, run by the Royal Malta Yacht Club, and and it's a pretty prestigious race. So you think something large. They've got 800 members, and that includes all their social members and the junior sailing. So it is a very small yacht club. But they provided a fantastic service. So you paid your entry fee. Well, we were given a weeks of free berthing, and we were put on the jetty right outside the front of the clubhouse. We were given a container to store gear in, which was fantastic because we got rid of all the cruising gear off the boat. They gave us more berthing when we came back in after the race through until the presentations. And to be honest, they couldn't really do enough for us in terms of just being helpful and friendly and actually pretty, well, with some exceptions, pretty professional. Results presentation, well, I'll cover that a little bit later, but you know that it means something to them when they get the president to rock up. The course, basically it's around Sicily and a few other outlying islands. And it is really interesting sailing because obviously, as you can see, you've got a lot of course direction changes, but particularly in the straits between Sicily and the mainland of Italy, got tides, I think 5 knots, maybe even 6 knots of tide through there. And on either side, you've got very high land, so the wind is blanketed. That high land, I think it goes up to 3,000 metres in places, of course, influences the wind offshore as well. So you've got a very geographic wind pattern. So from a navigator's point of view, it is a fantastic race to do. It really is challenging to get the boat in the right place for the different conditions. And another interesting feature is you've got a volcano as one of the turning marks on the course. So this was us coming past Stromboli. It was putting on a little bit of a show, a little bit of smoke. It doesn't really show in the photographs, they never do justice, but there was 30 plus knots, 35 knots, a couple of masts came down, lots of spinnakers blown out, a few boats retired, but we took it very conservatively. To say that we were underprepared is to be generous. It was because nobody could come from Australia. My crew were basically recruited off the docks of the UK, with the exception of Peter Fletcher, who came. We literally put the spinnaker up for the first time on the boat the day before the race started. So, and look, we made a decision right at the start that we're not in this to win it. We're in this to enjoy the sail. And we finished in the about 50 out of about 100 boats, so it wasn't too bad. The Son and I, the results, it was a very impressive results presentation. So they found a castle. They got a lot of castles in Malta, which had been converted into a convention centre. As I mentioned before, we had the President of Malta, we had probably half a dozen ministers, we had embassy officials, the whole box and dice. Unfortunately, because of the size of the venue, there was limits, so they only allowed 3 people per boat. In that particular year, under very controversial circumstances, Comanche ended up as the overall winner. And I'll just touch on a little bit on that controversy. What I really liked was that when they were announced as a winner, they got good applause, and nobody was diminishing what they had achieved. But then Sunrise, little JPK 1080, I think, or might be 1180. They were the boat which was originally announced as the winner and then was taken away from them, and the sailors gave them a standing ovation. So,
how many of those shirts have you got, Bill?
Same shirt. That's why I'm wearing it. Excuse me for the non-racers in the boat, in the room. Sorry, I'll just quickly explain what happened. So, the finish arrangement's really unusual. So, there's a turning mark outside the main harbour, and then the finish actually takes place inside the harbour. which sounds good and obviously makes for impressive photographs, but the harbour's 400 metres wide. So when the breeze gets up and the swell gets up, when we came in it was black. The foam from the swell was across half the harbour. The swells are bouncing off the breakwater on the other side. It was a really uncomfortable finish. So not long after we finished, they decided they were going to go back to the previous finish line. They had another finish line set up 20 miles back up the course. And so boats were reporting their times in there and they were using the trackers. And so they recalculated the results 20 miles back up the course. Well, of course, depending on how you went in that last 20 miles, it changed the results. So all I can say is that Rourke have now taken over basically the race management. So Royal Malta is still the organising authority, but Rourke basically it's completely rewritten the sailing instructions. They were ambiguous. They were very lucky the whole race, the results in total weren't thrown out. Anyway, that's the, but fundamentally the problem is when you try to do a downwind finish into a 400 metre wide harbour out of the open sea, well, it's gonna occasionally you're gonna have to move the finish line. And this was what the weather looked like 2 days after we finished, and that was showing a forecast wind speed, average wind speed of 55 knots. Malta is actually just right underneath that little like almost like a cyclone. Basically put a massive swell into the harbour. But I don't know if any of you are familiar with where you get an east coast low, which sort of spins up and sort of tightens over time. That's exactly what this particular low does. And these happen on a fairly regular basis. So if anybody thinks the Mediterranean is a light wind sailing area, this is just one of the number of surprises. Okay, I've done enough talking. Alexander is now going to share some of his experiences of a couple of locations.
So, just touching on Malta, is that okay? Just touching on Malta, which is obviously the location of the Middle Sea race. It's a really, really unique part of the world, sort of situated right in the middle of the Mediterranean. And it's actually the only alphabet and language that uses the Roman alphabet, but it's Arabic words. So I've put an example up there. I was pronouncing for 7 days straight, ta, ibex. And then on the last day, the taxi driver corrected me that it's Tash Bay. So I wasn't even close. I was playing a different sport. And of course, Malta is very close to Greece and Italy with the post-World War II migration. So it's very common for Spiros to ask if you've met his cousin in Melbourne. So that's a very common thing. Just on some of the entertainment of Malta, it's obviously been a long time trading port. So the entire sort of island has been built up with sandstone from the 1600s. So if you're not sort of overly into sailing long distances, you can roam these sort of narrow medieval streets eating pastries for hours, if not days. So I sort of picked 3 locations, and that's definitely a highlight for me for the Mediterranean. Moving on to another highlight for different reasons. Djibouti. So, located in the Horn of Africa, it's sort of a little oasis surrounded by some pretty unfriendly neighbours. There's obviously a bit of an arms race going on there with the different military superpowers, with France obviously being the original and now backed up with the US, and then China felt they had to get involved, and then Italy have sort of been there forever. But it's really the tale of two halves. I mean, this is a place where you see grown men with no shoes on or t-shirts sort of lying in the middle of the road, which is really depressing. And then further down the street, you go past security guards into an air-conditioned mall where Porsches are pulling up, and there's Arabic people wearing gold and silk, and it's just very confronting as an Australian, but also very interesting to talk to those sort of guys. As you can see, it's a nice little stat. It's ranked 130th on the corruption index, which doesn't put it particularly high. A funny experience, we actually got stuck there for 7 days waiting for the Minister of Tourism to return from his overseas holiday from France. When we then went to see him, he demanded a fee of $250 for a cruising permit. And we explained we only had $200 in the wallet. He changed the fee to $200, smiled and stamped that. When you do a little bit of research, there is no fee. And just a nice little side story. They got trapped by China into building a railway to Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia. However, to save costs, they actually made a straight line that didn't go through any villages. So villagers are having to walk 4, 5, 6 k's to the station to actually use this train. It is honestly a railway to nowhere. It doesn't even reach the port on the Djibouti side. So that's some of the problems that the government's facing. And then we'll get to here later in Dad's speech, but Labuan Bajo, which is on the island of Flores in Indonesia, so a fair bit east of Bali and Lombok. And by the time we got there, it felt like home. We're talking chicken and rice, we're talking local rice wine, we're talking scooters, it's corruption we understand. So that was really refreshing. And the COVID security had tightened a bit, so managed to have Ivona and her sister came and joined us. Todd and his partner Moira came and joined us for parts of Indonesia, and that was wonderful. Safe to say, Dad and I had run out of things to talk about by then. So the company was very welcome. So basically, I'm sort of here to talk about the off-water entertainment and mainly here to answer questions for after the speech. So I'll hand you back to the leader and hopefully that stimulates some discussions. Bear in mind this is PC event. The real stories will be on the rail upwind at night.
Okay, moving on. The last topic I want to cover is bringing the boat back into Australia. And of course, the big issue is tax. And of course, government wants to squeeze every cent out of you they can. So there's another whole story about why we ended up having to divert to Darwin to do check-in and put another 1,000 miles on the trip, but I won't cover that. But the main thing is that when you bring a new boat in, or a boat which is wasn't purchased in Australia, you obviously have to pay tax, GST, 10%, and then depending on which country the boat is from, you may have to pay import duty as well, which is generally 5%. So the big issue is, okay, well, what's the value of the boat on which you pay that tax? So if you just buy a boat and put it on a ship and bring it here, there's just a very simple formula. It's the purchase price of the boat plus the cost of shipping. You wouldn't have bought that boat if that wasn't an attractive delivered price. So therefore that's taken to be the market price. You pay the tax on that amount. There is basically no room for argument. But when we rocked up in Darwin, we had 15,000 miles on the boat. And so we mounted an argument that the boat wasn't brand new anymore and there had to be some depreciation taken into account. Well, I think the next thing that happened was we had a control order slapped on the boat where we were banned from moving the boat from Darwin before we'd settled the tax. I think that was going to come anyway. So anyway, after a bit of... And what it turned out is, in the legislation, it talks about if the purchase price is separated in time from the import date, then there can be a separate assessment of market value. And it appears that the standard they operate, if it's been more than a year, then they're open to have a discussion. So we got it agreed that the boat would be valued I'd get a market valuation in Australia. I said, look, we can't really get it done in Darwin. The boat's got to come out of the water for a survey. Makes more sense to do that in Fremantle. So they said yes, but you've got to pay tax based off a provisional estimate of the value. And look, we actually haggled that and we got that we're pretty happy with that. I think we got about 40% off or something like that for provisional tax. Got the boat down here. I found the surveyor from hell that can find every defect in the boat. and amazing how many. Well, you know, to be honest, after 15,000 miles or 16,000 miles, you've done a fair bit of sailing, and so there's a few little nicks and stuff. So he produced a survey report. Tony Buscher from Fixsail gave me a valuation, and Border Force accepted it without debate. So, look, to be honest, the importation was not that difficult. However, you have to use an agent. So everything has to go into the Border Force computer system. It all has to be coded perfectly. If you code it incorrectly, they'll think you're importing guns or something like that. So you've got to get the coding absolutely right. And unless you play with that system every day of the week, you stand no chance. So I'm afraid you just have to pay an agent. But I used a guy here that a few other people have used, including John Sanders and Terry Baker, and his charge was, I can't recall what it was, pretty reasonable. He said to me afterwards he lost money on the job, but a very reasonable charge. So that gets us back into Australia. Jesus. Somebody was getting creative. Obviously this is coming back here into Fremantle, and it was after that amount of distance, it was a fantastic welcome back here at the club. It was raining, it was cold, it was windy, and a bunch of sailors and others came down to welcome Alex and myself. So I'd just like to just finish up by saying a few thank yous. Although this is a French boat, it actually had a fair amount of Fremantle content to it. Jeff Bishop was a fantastic help to me, not only on the sails, but also on, to be honest, on the general setup of everything on the deck. Helping on selecting the furlers. We've got 3 furlers on the boat, for the staysail, for the jib, and for the Code Zero. Even dealing with Jean-Pierre it can be a little difficult at times, and we were having a long debate about a main sheet traveller, and he wasn't very happy, and he said, look, I'm sorry, I don't have time to build this boat. And it looked like the whole project was coming to a nasty end. Chatting with Jeff, and I was crying into my beer, and he said, well, what about Philip Pechet? Because his daughter Alice was working for Jeff at that stage. So turns out that Philippe, of course, knows him, lives in the same town. They didn't quite go to school together, but Philippe's father had bought a boat off Jean-Pierre. So the two of them got together and they had a big chat, and Philippe came back to me and said, look, you're not going to get a main sheet traveller, but here's how you can rig up. Here's a workaround you can do, which will give you most of the benefits of having a traveller. But you just have to accept that's the... anyway, he pulled the fat out of the fire. So really big thanks to Jeff. Steve Locke helped me out on some of the decisions on rigging, running rigging, and the halyard lock on the staysail. Cluffy on did the instruments design, the layout design, all those installed by the French. Dave, who's sailed with me a lot, he came out to Djibouti and did the long leg across the Indian Ocean, and then again for the leg down from Exmouth. Ivona, Hanka, Linda, and I apologise, Todd. I should have both Todd and Maura on this slide. Basically, help welcome us into Indonesia, and as Alexander said, it really felt by the time we had these guys on the boat and we were in Indo, felt like we're home. The Fremantle community, fantastic welcome and support for the whole project, and of course, I have to say thank you to Alexander. 1,600 miles of sailing. I can't say we never had a crossword, we had a couple, but nothing too serious, and that aspect of the experience has been is frankly irreplaceable. You can buy a boat any time, but to be able to get one of your kids to sail with you for a year is fantastic. So thank you, Alexander. happy to take any questions. If you want to know anything about the nightlife of any of the ports, Alex is on point for that.
Alex, would you do it again?
Short answer, in a heartbeat. As a long answer, maybe some selective locations. But no, as Dad just touched on, the fact to actually do that with your old man and some really good friends, and to see a heap of countries that, as a bloke growing up in Oz, to go and see pizza in Sicily and stuff like that was just irreplaceable. Yeah, so would definitely do it again and recommend it.
Alex, how was your old man as a wingman?
Shit house. No, he left me sort of to go free range and sort of release a fox into the coop. So, sorry.
I have a question, so I want to pass the first one across to you, Dad. How do you go on for insurance? Because there's a lot of different areas that you covered, including the Middle Sea race and then coming down through the Red Sea. And secondly, after you came through the south of the canal, what stops did you make before going out of the Gulf of Aden?
Yeah, good questions, John. Look, insurance, at that time, Pantanius were willing to insure us, actually for the entire trip. The rates went up and down depending on which section we were in, and so I sort of paid the premium, and then there was some complicated, some arithmetic to work out. I think I ultimately got a small refund, but it was based off, they charge by zone, but they would even cover us through the Red Sea. It's a big problem though. So again, if you join the Red Sea Passage group, you'll find there's a lot of traffic there about people finding it really hard to get insurance. I have to say, at the moment, Pantanius is the only company in Australia that will insure the boat because it's got a carbon mast in it. So, in terms of stopping, look, I can't say that Egypt was a very welcoming place. If I could just tell one story, we sailed for a long day. We pulled into this wide open bay. We put the anchor down. There was no sign of anything around, a few little huts on the shore. And the VHF comes to life. And of course, we've got AIS on, so they know who we are. So, Cyrene, this is the Egyptian Navy. So you do not have permission to stay in this bay. I said, well, we only want to stay one night. We've just sailed all day. We're leaving at dawn. Please, surely that's okay. So no, you don't have permission. Oh, can we request permission? They came back 10 minutes later. Yes, you can stay the night. $1,500 US. So subsequent to that, again, this Red Sea Passage group has identified a number of bays where you can stop. The only real place we stopped was Port Galib, which is a big sort of canal development about 2/3 of the way down Egypt, and then Djibouti. And if I was doing it again, to be perfectly honest, I would probably try to miss both those places as well. Certainly Djibouti, you wouldn't go to Djibouti unless you needed fuel or water, so it's not an attractive place.
What turned you off going into Port Sudan?
We just didn't need to. We wanted to get moving, and so from Port Galib to Djibouti was like 6 days or something like that. So, and to be honest, after a few other incidents as well, getting harassed for money at every location, frankly, we just said, let's get the hell out of here. And to be honest, if we weren't picking up somebody in Djibouti, we would have bypassed Djibouti and gone straight to the Maldives. So I'm not saying it's not dangerous, but it's not cruising country. Alan.
So, Xander, if Djibouti's one of your highlights, why are you going to stop there but your dad's not?
It's an experience.
Do I have to come and sail upwind at night?
2 a.m. on the rail. I'll tell you about it coming back from Georgia. Let's just say that wealth disparity there creates some very, very well-off people. And when you go into these discos, I had an experience with a Somali man that proclaimed to be a warlord. He then showed me on his iPhone several elephant tusks, pieces of gold, and what looked like human remains, also in a cabinet. So you meet those sort of characters, which is good for a couple of days. And I also introduced Dad to a little bit of the nightlife by bringing back two Somali partygoers that I partied with, and the look on Dad's face when he woke to two strange men sleeping on the foredeck was one to remember. Sorry if I know.
Can you also tell us the experience how you were getting water in Djibouti, and is it easy to restock?
There is water in Djibouti, however it is all piped from Ethiopia, and it's not of drinking quality. So you have to go to water hydration stations with 20-litre jerry cans, walk in the through the mud of the marina to a taxi, and the taxis there, they don't have doors, so they can only be opened from the inside to stop people going into them, and the front windshields also look like someone's taken a bat to them. So it's a bit of an experience sort of bumping around in the taxis. But the kicker of that one was there was a bit of a weird smell. We sort of put up with it, we did the shuttle run there and back to the boat, he waited around, and by about the third trip, because we could only do 80 litres at a time for 800, so 10 trips of this, in 40 degrees, by the way, he opened his boot to show me what the smell was, and he had a large Spanish mackerel not on ice sitting directly in the carpet of his boot. The eye was milky white, not clear, and he offered to sell it to Dad and I. So I think we had Pizza Hut for dinner that night.
Best meal and worst meal on board the boat?
Best meal was a Napolitana pizza in Sardinia. The worst meal...
Bad cooking.
I did see a goat in Djibouti eating human feces. Ate goat later that evening. The cycle of life continued. So that was the strangest meal. Yes, mate.
What were the winds like coming down the Red Sea?
Pretty much as Dad said, it would pick up in the evening at about 6 o'clock. It would go up from 14 to 18. Came down in the evening. Yeah, sorry, and picked up in the morning, but the direction was very, very consistent. Stick to my lane.
In the northern part of the Red Sea, the wind blows from the north nearly all the time, and the southern part flip-flops with the monsoon. But at the time we were going, because it was northeast monsoon, we basically had northerly the whole way down the Red Sea, and probably, I don't know, 15, 20 knots, something like that. So not a hell of a lot of breeze, and again, there's no tide in the Red Sea, so pretty, the water was pretty flat actually.
Yes.
So, coming into Darwin after all this journey, and it was obviously 15,000 miles, but you have obviously to clear in. What was the experience like with the authorities such as quarantine and the customs? Because it's an international yacht through different country zones. What were they looking for, and how did you experience it?
Look, apart from the fact we had to go to Darwin, because we would normally have cleared in at Dampier, it was no drama. So just the standard clear in, come on the boat.
Did they ask you to hang off the coastline for a little while?
They have a mooring area outside of the marina, so you had to stay on the mooring area until they call you to come into the jetty. They do set up traffic cones and some tape around the boat, so supposedly that keeps everybody away from it. But no, it's nothing special actually. To be honest, they were pretty relaxed. They didn't do it. We did have to. We were at one stage going to go into the marina, so we had to get a diver to come and squirt stuff up all the pipes and the engine coolant and stuff like that. So, but that was separate, absolutely, because we were into the marina. But otherwise, clearing in was no particular problem actually.
What's your highlight of the trip, and it's a question to both of you because I'm sure it will be different. Highlight of the trip.
Look, I suppose, to be honest, the Middle Sea race was pretty special actually. So the start is spectacular. We were sort of manoeuvring around in the harbour, trying to stay out of the way of Comanche and Scorpios, and then the start gun is a proper cannon fired off another castle up on the thing. To be honest, the other highlight was when we came round. That photo at the start shows us cutting fairly close around the mole, so we turned and we came across the regular finish line past B mark just as a little gesture to mark the end of the trip.
I also have to agree with Dad, not about the getting off the boat in Frere, or that was good. The Middle Sea race was the highlight for me, but as much as the sailing was awesome, it was meeting sailors from the Northern Hemisphere. So meeting Germans that also go racing and Dutchies, and we just don't meet people like that. So that sort of human interaction was really, really cool. And as well the history. So the Mediterranean was definitely the highlight for me. Good question. Alistair.
The trip took you about 11 months altogether, but some of that was extended because of your cruising preferences. What's a realistic time to bring the boat from Europe if you weren't actually enjoying, I'm not saying you would turn it into perjury, but if you were not choosing to extend some of it?
Yeah, look, I'm saying that 11, 12 months, that included 3 months in Indonesia, so because we didn't want to come back to Fremantle in the middle of winter, so there was a lot of time. Sri Lanka was a fantastic country. I think we stayed 4 weeks in Sri Lanka, maybe even 5. So probably do it in half the time would still mean stopping in the ports, but not sort of not taking extended times in the ports. So 6 months would be plenty, I think. Probably, if you wanted to push it, probably do it in 3 months.
Would you did you have D-Cell, or would you put D-Cell in for a trip like that?
I decided that with 800 litres of water storage, we would try without desal. Right. So, and that was enough to cover the longer legs. But as Alex was explaining, getting hold of water in some of these places was a fair bit of work.
In the right side, would you change?
Look, it also depends on how many people you've got in the boat. So, as I mentioned, we did have some visitors in Indonesia, and I have to say we filled up the boat fully in Bali, again with containers, and with 3 women on the boat, the water lasted 3 days. But the good news was they helped refill the boat, and after that, the next tank of water lasted a hell of a lot longer. So, no, look, I think if you've got a few people on the boat, you definitely go desal just to save the work of trying to get the water onto the boat.
Bill, weather routing services and Iridium or Skynet?
Sorry, what's the, I forget the name of the thing, the Musk thing wasn't available at that time, so we did it all with the good old Iridium slow. So, and look, it's slow, but it worked all the time. We used Predict Wind for weather. I became quite attached to the European model, seemed to match the actual conditions we had most closely. And look, we didn't sail in any unexpected conditions. The forecasts were really good. So.
And the Iridium says you're okay?
Look, it's fine. It's just slow. It's just slow. But it would always get there. So it might take a long time. And I learned over time just to you've got to absolutely minimise the download quantity. But of course, there's a newer version of an Iridium out now, and I'm sure there's more competition coming. So, but no, look, as I said, we didn't actually hit any bad weather because the forecasts were so good, and so we if the weather was looking lousy, we wouldn't sail. So it was it has made long distance cruising such a different game when you've got reliable weather forecasts. look, the only place we had a problem with was Indonesia. So all the rest of the place, I did have a filter to filter all the fuel before it went into the tanks. I've got two filters, primary filters in parallel, so you can just switch. When one blocks, you can just switch to the second filter and then change the first one at your leisure. But the only place we saw dirty fuel was really Indonesia, and some places was as black as it ever has been. So, yeah. So, but look, the two filters in parallel. You know, I have tried changing filters when you're at sea, and of course it's lousy because you've got the engine on because you've probably got no wind or too much wind, and putting a second filter in parallel and just switch them over, and then you can change it at your leisure.
So this is a bit of a dumb question. Probably loads of people in the room would understand, would know this, but if there's only two of you and you're sailing continuously, is someone always on deck and someone's asleep? How does it work? What have you got with a pilot?
Yeah, look, to be honest, two of us is pretty hard actually, so we're basically doing 2 or 3 hours on, depending on, I think we did 2 at night and 3 in the day, 3 hours off, so somebody on deck all the time. We got sort of not the top of the range, like a good autopilot, so it's one which has got a motion sensor which feeds into the autopilot, so you can watch it when the boat rolls on a wave. It will start to apply helm to correct the boat even before it starts to go off course, and the autopilot sailed the boat probably 95% of the time, and we had no problems at all with the with any of the electronics or even the actuator arm. Twin rudders on a boat makes it so much easier. Makes it very easy for the autopilot to steer the boat. So, but yeah, definitely, if you're doing a long trip, investing in a good autopilot's probably #1 priority. Right.
Power management. How did you get on with batteries and charging and stuff?
Look, the boat's pretty simple in its setup. We don't have a freezer. We just got a fridge, autopilot and laptop, and solar panels on a bimini, and a reasonable amount of batteries, which are lithium batteries. So the lithium batteries, you can, when the engine runs, you're putting 75 amps into them, and it will maintain 75 amps until it switches off. So you don't have any of that tapering down with lead acid. So yeah, that's all we had. We didn't have any generator, didn't have a wind generator or water generator, just solar panels and the engine.
So thank you so much to Bill and Alex. Very inspiring, very informative. This is a small token of our appreciation.